Hello, welcome back to my channel. This is our Year of the Heart, and we are wrapping up, well, we have one more video after this, but wrapping up our Year of the Heart with Brené Brown's new book, Atlas of the Heart. We are on chapter 12 now, which is not a happy one again, but not a horrible one either. It's not a sad one, but it's a mad one. So it is the places we go when we feel wronged. So I'm sure that you can probably relate to that. You might think of defensiveness, anger, feeling like things are unjust. So some of those things are in the undertones of these words: anger, contempt, disgust, dehumanization, hate, and self-righteousness. And if you saw the movie Inside Out by Pixar and Disney, there was one of the characters, which was one of what they consider to be the core emotions, was disgust. And we talk about that a bit in this chapter. So you wouldn't be human if you didn't know what anger was, right? I think that Brené believes that to be a combination of a lot of emotions, but the research here sort of acted what she's thought about anger for a long time. So she does share that she sort of had to like unlearn her description of anger from the past, because and that was like frustrating for her. I think probably angered her in a little bit of a way, because she has always felt that like anger is a manifestation of a bunch of emotions. But her research did show that it actually is one of the main emotions that people were able to identify immediately. If you think of like happy, sad, mad, that was kind of like the main primary ones that people went to. So anger would be part of that mad part, right? She says, I've spent a lot of my career saying that anger is secondary or indicative of an emotion that often conceals emotions that are harder to recognize, name, or own. But then, according to the majority, like she says, she is wrong. And that 91% of emotion experts believe that anger is a primary emotion. And she says, we've asked around 7,500 people in their research here to identify all the emotions that they could recognize and name. And there were the average of 3, which I just said: glad, sad, and mad. Or happy, sad, and pissed off, if you were going to be writing it down like in a just sort of like a casual way. She does have an interesting chart in here, and I can relate to this. And you'll want to look at it, this pie chart here on page 222. And it's more in line with what she was saying, that she believes that behind anger might be all of these other things that she's saying. Things like fear, depression, rejection, loneliness, embarrassment, humiliation, guilt, hurt, grief, jealousy, outrage at injustice, confusion, frustration, isolation, sadness, shame. There's tons of them in here, so I can relate to that. I think that's true. And I think I've shared with you before that a lot of times, like, anger is sometimes the first thing that I go to. I'm like quick to anger, but it's usually because of some other emotion. So I'm kind of like on the fence about this. But this is what she says: anger is a catalyst. Holding on to it will make us exhausted and sick. Internalizing anger will take away our joy and spirit. Then externalizing anger will make us less effective in our attempts to create change and forge connections. It is an emotion that we need to transform into something life-giving, which would be courage, love, change, compassion, and justice. So those sound more in line with Brené's guideposts for a wholehearted life. What about contempt? It's interesting that she went to contempt before hate, right? Because I think of hate as being like the pinnacle of, well, I would think contempt would be like a part of hate, that you would have to have hatred for somebody to have contempt. But she does have them separated. And contempt is, this is what they defined it as: contempt is one of the most damaging of the 4 negative communication patterns that predict divorce. Actually, this is not the full definition, but she's talking about it in terms of relationships. We've mentioned the Gottman Institute a few times because she's referenced them in the book a few times. And that if there are spouses or partners that feel contempt towards each other, then that can be like the number one indicator of whether a relationship is going to last or not. Contempt results in distancing, ignoring, or excluding the contemptible person, and they are not considered worthy of one's time or energy. This attitude seems partially attributed to the key distinguishing feature between contempt and anger, namely that contempt results when there is a perception that the contemptible person is incapable of change. That's interesting. So with that anger, where it was like one of the things underlying it could have been the feeling of injustice, perhaps going to contempt because you feel like no matter what, there isn't going to be a change, and so you're always going to be in this feeling of injustice. So I could see how contempt could be a larger word for groups of people that you might consider to be like, actually she does talk a bit about America today and how people that have different political views, they can have contempt for each other because they just feel like the other people are so stuck in their ways, and there's no middle ground for the two. Yeah. Contempt makes political compromise and progress impossible. It also makes unhappy people. I've definitely experienced contempt on both ends. Getting it and giving it. Disgust. This is the one I mentioned that's in Inside Out. With contempt, we look down on another person and we want to exclude or ignore them. So it's like, talk to the hand, you don't exist. Something like that, right? With disgust, inferiority is not the issue, though. The feeling is more of a physical thing. So like when you see some kind of food that you were like, oh, I would never eat that. You know, we want, and actually she does talk about how the emotion sort of stemmed out of, it's like a good thing physically because it stops us from eating something that might be poisonous or smells bad or something. So it's almost like it's good that we have disgust, but then when you turn it towards like if it becomes an emotion that you feel for somebody else or a group of people, then it's not really very good. So why isn't it good? It's because you've dehumanized the person. So with contempt, you don't want to feel like they exist, so you just sort of ignore them or you stay on your own side of a certain issue. But with disgust, you could be so disgusted that you are just not even thinking of them as a person anymore. So perhaps you don't think that they are warranted to have human rights or dignity. And with disgust, we've taken an emotion that keeps us safe from the stuff that can make us sick and turned it into emotion that can be weaponized against people who make us sick. So we've definitely seen that throughout history, right? And what is dehumanization? She has that in here too. It continues to be one of the greatest threats to humanity, she says. They define it as a psychological process of demonizing an enemy, making them seem less than human and hence not worthy of humane treatment. So we think about things like Holocaust and genocide and other things like that, where at some point they must have gotten to a point where they just, I don't know if it was disgust or contempt or just not understanding the people or just being, I don't even know how to describe it, but just not thinking of them as another human being that would want to live or have nice conditions or whatever. So you could see that that would be very damaging. Obviously, this book is about connection too, right? So in terms of connection, you're not going to have connection with contempt, dehumanization, or probably not anger either, and definitely not disgust. You're not going to want to be around somebody or something that disgusts you. So those are things that are going to stop you from being connected, which is what Brené is always trying to talk about. So now we have hate. According to researcher Robert Sternberg, hate is a combination of various negative emotions, including some of the ones we've talked about: repulsion, disgust, anger, fear, and contempt. We feel hate towards individuals or groups that we believe are intentionally malicious and unlikely to change. What's interesting is that we can develop hate towards people that we don't even know personally, simply based on their affiliation with a group or ideology that doesn't align with our beliefs. So there has to be a certain amount of rigidity on our end too, where we're not probably going to change too, in order to like really hate a whole group of people or people that are in certain circumstances. We know from research that hate crime victims generally have not done anything specific. They're just terrified. They're just terrorized for who they are, not for what they've done. Yeah. And Brené says, the research that I've found the most devastating explain that the goal of hate is not merely to hurt, but to ultimately eliminate or destroy the target. So that would be, she doesn't have dehumanization in the hate, but when I mentioned something like a larger movement of genocide or something like that, then you would be trying to just wipe out an entire group of people, either mentally, like humiliating, or socially, just ignoring them or excluding them, or physically killing or torturing them. And it may be accompanied by the goal to let the wrongdoer just suffer, and the wrongdoer is in parentheses, or quotes, I should say. So it's interesting. Was this one of the words? Self-righteousness, was it? Yeah, that's the last word. Self-righteousness. When I think of self-righteous, I think of like, she's so self-righteous. Like, she thinks she's just the end-all be-all of everything, and that her way is the only way and stuff like that. That's what I think of. So, yeah, and actually that screams judgment against others, but it's often to hide the noise of skeletons dancing in our own closets. That's a quote from John Mark Green. Yeah, I could see that. So I could see how self-righteousness would be wrapped up in some of those other things. If you were going to get to the point where you had such contempt or disgust towards people or groups, then you would have to sort of feel self-righteous in it too. You'd have to feel like your way was the right way and they were wrong, so then that would mean that X, Y, and Z, or that like they didn't deserve to have the rights or be treated well or something like that. You'd have to have that. She says, according to research, self-righteousness is the conviction that one's beliefs and behaviors are the most correct. Right? It's important to realize that self-righteousness is different from righteousness. In the case of righteousness, we appropriately react we react to injustice, and we're trying to do the right thing. When feeling self-righteous, though, we feel morally superior to others, and we're trying to convince ourselves or others that we're doing the right thing. So like our disgust or our contempt about them is warranted because they're not following the right path or the right moves. So there is a bit, I'm not really going into the much depth in this chapter, but there is a bit said about the political climate of our country and how some of these words are at the forefront of people's experiences right now. I'll let you read those. We have one more chapter and then we'll be through this book, so hopefully I can do it in the next week before the end of the year, and it's the one about self-reflection. The places we go to self-assess. Now there's a lot here. Oh, I see, because at the end she's got some photos and pictures and things. So I'm assuming there'll be some sort of a little wrap up at the end, and then actually there's a huge part, probably 15 to 20 pages in the back too, that are all about references and stuff too. So we really just have like a regular size chapter to go through at the end. So I will make sure that I get that done before the end of the year so that we can wrap up our year of the heart. I hope you're having a wonderful holiday season and that you have some special plans with special people during this time, and that you are feeling like your heart is full and that you've learned a bit from this book this year. I've definitely gotten some things out of it myself. I hope you will leave me a comment. I love hearing from you guys and sending you lots of love, and I'll see you on the next video.